Welcome back. All right, now we're going to talk about the Atlantic Division. Here's your Atlantic Division leaders. I don't know for how much longer, and I'm being honest as a Bruins fan, I don't know how much longer they're going to lead this division. They currently have 44 points. They're 19, 7, and 6. Maybe the Christmas break will help them. They have a 688 points percentage, and their recent record has not been fantastic, and they have 7 of their next 10 on the road. So for Jim Montgomery and the Bruins, now is the time to get this together. If they can have a really strong record over those next 10 games, especially with it being road heavy, you got to think things even out later on in the season, right? Now, currently they are the number 2 team in the East, so they would play the number 1 wild card, which would be the Washington Capitals. Historically, against the Capitals, it's been kind of a back and forth thing, right? There have been times where Washington beats Boston, times where Boston beats Washington, and we'll see how it all works out. Now, the MVP for the Bruins, to me, is David Pastrnak. And I went back and forth on whether or not to pick one of the goalies or just straight goalies. The goalies were helping him out a lot early in the season where they weren't necessarily playing great hockey, but the goaltending was fantastic. And it does feel like now that the goaltending is still very good, but not quite as earth-shattering as it was earlier in the season, the team started to have its share of struggles. So does Toronto take first place from them by the end of the season. That is quite possible. Now they're 17, 8, and 6 on the season. They have 40 points. They have a 645 points percentage. Still a very strong points percentage for Toronto. And 5 of their next 10 are on the road. Apologies for the spelling error, but it is Christmas Eve, so I'm not surprised there's one on the board. But yeah, 5 of the next 8 are on the road for Toronto, and of course their MVP has to be Austin Matthews. Who else would the MVP for Toronto be? You could argue Mitch Marner. Maybe you might be able to argue Wall as well when he's in there, but I think it has to be Matthews. In the dry spell he had earlier in the season, it didn't really go on that long. It wasn't really that big of a deal, and he still looks like he's cruising towards a Richard Trophy. Now, whether or not he gets there, we'll see, and I'll definitely have to do a video over the next couple of days on awards and where everything is, because even though we're not halfway through the season, it's never too easy or too early to discuss that. Even though it's not easy to come up with who's going to win these awards when you're not halfway done the season yet. So Florida, 19, 12, and 2 record. They also have 40 points, so they're 4 points back of Boston. They have a 606 points percentage. And 5 of their next 7 are on the road. And if they can navigate that well, they then have a 5-game homestand. So for Florida, it's about getting through that road trip, or at the very least 5 of the 7 on the road, and then make hay at home, right? The MVP for me, Sam Reinhart. Reinhart has produced a ton of points. He's in a contract year. So if you're the general manager of the Florida Panthers, do you approach this and say, you know what, we want to pay you what your career averages state you should be able to produce? Or do they say we want to pay you based on how this season's gone? The player wants to get paid by how the season's gone. I think sometimes GMs are likely thinking the former, which is we'd like to pay them based on what we think they're going to do from here. And that's where we as fans get into the debate and everything. But I think Reinhardt's going to cash in big time this coming summer. So whether or not Florida convince him to take a bit of a discount to stay there, we'll see. And I think it's going to really depend on how strong a run this team has in the postseason. If you feel like you have a chance to win a Stanley Cup, you're going to stay. At least historically, that's usually the way it's worked, is the teams that are seen as really legit contenders. It's one reason why, if you're a Canuck fan, you're worried about Pettersson. Hey, the longer the Canucks are on a run like this, the less you have to worry about Pettersson leaving. And with Reinhart, I think it's the same thing. If Florida has a really strong second half of the season, he'll stick around. I'd be surprised if he left. Tampa Bay, 17, 13, and 5 record, 39 points. Their points percentage, 557. So for Tampa Bay, they've had their struggles. And yet they're still sitting in the number 2 wildcard spot. So for Tampa Bay, it really is just they're in a playoff spot. Just get there, right? And if it was Tampa Bay and the Rangers in the first round, who doesn't want to see that? Because I absolutely do. Now, their schedule is interesting. They have 3 at home, 3 away, 4 at home, 3 away. There's no road trip that's too long. There's no homestand that's too long. To me, that's kind of perfect. I think as a team, 3 at home, 3 on the road, that's kind of perfect where you're in a nice rhythm. And you don't get into a long road trip where you're necessarily exhausted by the end of it. And you're not at home so long that you kind of get sort of maybe a little lazy and lackadaisical in your play. But yeah, for Tampa Bay, I think that's a favorable schedule for them. 3-3-4-3, I think that works. And so we'll see how they get through that after the break. For Detroit, really, really strong start's kind of been forgotten at this point. They're 16, 14, and 4, 36 points, so they're 3 points out of the playoffs. .529 points percentage, so their points percentage wouldn't put them in the playoffs either. They have an upcoming stretch with 6 of 8 on the road, so not immediately. They have a relatively even schedule, but they do have an upcoming run in January where there's 6 out of 8 on the road. The MVP for me with Detroit kind of has to be Dylan Larkin. So with the MVP for Detroit, it would have been DeBrincat early in the season. At certain points, you might have argued Alex Lyon for a couple of weeks there, but yeah, I'll go with Larkin. I think overall he has been their best player. He really is the glue that holds them together. And if they're going to navigate this and end up jumping back into a playoff spot, I think Larkin's going to have to, rally the troops and lead by example. And I know he can do that. Detroit fans know he can do that. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to watch them as the season rolls on. Montreal, 15-13-5. They're 4 points out of a playoff spot. They have a .530 points percentage, so they're 1 percentage point ahead of Detroit. Winning enough games to keep them in the hunt, but there's enough setbacks that come here and there that I don't think they make the playoffs, but they're fun to watch. They're fun to watch because there's no expectation. This is a good example of how a team with no expectation and no pressure, they play a different style of hockey. It's just so much more relaxed. They are 3 games into a 7-game road trip, which has been successful thus far. And then 5 of the 6 games after this road trip are at home. So if they can continue this solid road trip they've had, which involved getting a point in Minnesota, which is rare, I think this team, maybe you end up in a buying position at the deadline. Or at the very least, you don't quite sell. So maybe you sell off somebody who's an unrestricted free agent this coming summer, and then you bring somebody else in who you feel like is still suited to help your team continue that run towards the playoffs. MVP for Montreal's tough. There's been a number of players who've been good at times. I'll go with Sam Montembeault. Their goaltending has been discussed a lot. Their goaltending has been solid. All 3 goaltenders have been good. I think Montembeault's been the best of the 3. But yeah, Primo has been no slouch himself in that category. And I mean, Suzuki at times has been their best player. Josh Anderson, I think, has a chance to go on quite the run. Maybe not MVP level, but quite the run after the break here, because he started the run going into the break. But yeah, Montreal's interesting. Buffalo's interesting too, although car crash interesting. 14-17-4 overall, 32 points, so they're 7 points out of the playoffs. And this is the difficulty now. For them to make the playoffs, they have to jump past 3 teams in their own division. It's not including the teams they have to jump past in the Metro. And they're 7 points back of that spot. So the .457 points percentage, depressingly something that Buffalo fans are familiar with, having a sub-500 team. They have 2 games at home coming out of the break, then 3 away, and then a 6-game homestand. So that's 8 of their next 11 at home. They really need to start winning some games at home. It's going to help their home attendance if they do, and maybe generate some energy in that crowd. And yeah, it's been tough. Now, MVP for Buffalo, it's not an easy call. I wanted to put Dahlin, but Dahlin, I don't know if I can say consistently he's been their best player. I went with Casey Mittelstadt. I feel like Mittelstadt's not getting the attention that I think he necessarily deserves. And I think if you look at just consistency, I'm going to go with Mittelstadt. There are others you can go with, sure, but when a team's underachieving like Buffalo is, I wanted to highlight somebody that I feel like has brought their A game on a regular basis. And then you have Ottawa, a team that shouldn't be at the bottom, right? They're 12-17 so far, 24 points. So they are 15 points out of a playoff spot, and they do not have the games in hand that they did at the start of this month. They still have games in hand on teams that they're chasing, but not as many, and there's not enough. 414 is their points percentage right now, which again, not good enough, not anywhere near good enough for playoffs. They have an upcoming 5-game road trip. Remember, they had a 5-game road trip where they lost all 5. The upcoming 5-game road trip, they need to not lose 5 of those games. They need to actually win probably 3 of the 5. And if they could go 3-1-1, that'd be even better. Their MVP so far, I went with Claude Giroux. Claude Giroux, I think, has led as a veteran on that team. I think he's done a good job so far. And so I'm going with Giroux. But again, when a team is underachieving like Ottawa has, picking out an MVP can be a little bit difficult for the wrong reasons. Where you're like, I'd love to put Sanderson, but. I'd love to put Tkachuk, however. I'd love to put Stützle, but. And so I'm going with Giroux. Because again, the veteran, I feel like he's been good every game. And he gives them that leadership. So We'll see how things go for them coming out of the break. But let me know your thoughts. Will Tampa Bay stay above the line? Will all four of these teams stay above the line? And who ends up winning the division by the end of the season? Will it be Toronto? Will it be Florida? Does Boston hold it? Or does Tampa Bay come up and steal it themselves? Let me know your thoughts. Or hey, does Ottawa go on a fantastic run and they get it? Why not? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.